Serious answers only. People who have worked in psychiatric hospitals. Tell us about your most difficult patient. For some time, I worked in the dental department of a psychiatric hospital. I will never forget a patient named Terry. Terry loved wearing little girls' clothing, and around his neck, he carried cut-out pictures of little girls from magazines. When I first saw him, I immediately assumed he was some kind of pervert. Later, I learned from a colleague, a dentist, that Terry had witnessed his father brutally assault and then kill his younger sister when he was a child. In some way, he began to take on his little sister's identity and considered the girls in the cutout photos to be his friends. I felt so bad for jumping to conclusions about him, especially after getting to know him better and seeing what a gentle and kind person he was. In the day treatment center where I volunteered, I led a work group, helping people set goals and find motivation to continue their treatment. One time, a woman made a very powerful and clear statement, saying she sincerely wanted to recover so she could be the best wife and mother, to have the strength and energy to do household chores, play with her children, and so on. A few weeks after I started leading this group, I mentioned her statement to another therapist, who told me that this woman had neither a husband nor children. She never had. I worked in a juvenile psychiatric ward. We had a 16-year-old boy who had been admitted for shooting his 3-year-old sister. By court order, he was to stay there for a certain period. Later, I learned that he had also been abused by his father. I asked him where he would live after being released, since he obviously couldn't go back home to his sister. He said his father had found a mobile home and parked it by a lake. He planned to live there until he finished school. Yes, this was the same father who had abused him. In our unit, we had a boy who had a severely disrupted sense of identity. He would sometimes start screaming, begging his mother to stop beating him. He had very serious perception issues, which made working with him extremely difficult. I remember how he looked at me as he described how she used to beat him with chains and a belt. According to his doctor, the boy was experiencing a safe environment for the first time in his life, which allowed his mind to recall past traumas. During my senior year of high school, I interned at a psychiatric clinic and encountered 2 equally difficult patients. One was a man with Wernicke's encephalopathy. He constantly had hallucinations and delusions. Sometimes he thought he was in a sauna, and other times he believed he had simply gone out to buy shoes. He had to be strapped to a chair because he would sometimes become aggressive. A large percentage of alcoholics suffer from Wernicke's syndrome. Most of them die before the disease fully manifests, but about 2% of all alcoholics eventually develop this disorder. The second patient was a woman with severe brain damage. She had to be kept locked in a padded room and deprived of access to anything she could put in her mouth because she would try to eat anything. Disposable cups, utensils, plates, and so on. One night, during a full moon, and anyone who has ever worked in a psychiatric clinic knows what I mean by full moon, she gouged out her own eye with a plastic spoon she had taken from a food tray on her way to the bathroom, despite being physically restrained and accompanied by 2 orderlies. Edit. I forgot to mention that her eyeball was later found in her stomach. I worked in a juvenile ward, and we had a very troubled girl. I even had to put a head restraint on her because she was so determined to kill herself that she tried to chew through her own shoulder. About 3 years later, I was taking a bus to a psychology grad school interview when I had to transfer to another bus. A well-dressed young woman approached me and asked if I was from Colorado. I said yes. Then she asked if I had ever worked in a psychiatric unit. Turned out she was that same girl. She had gotten better. We chatted a little, and I told her how happy I was to see her doing well. She smiled, thanked me, and we said goodbye. We had a kid who would lose control during my night shift. He was from South America and would mutter in Spanish about demons coming for him during his episodes. I barely spoke Spanish, so I couldn't do much to calm him down. One time, during one of his fits, he suddenly stopped screaming and fell silent. His eyes widened, staring at something right behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing there, yet he kept staring. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. My sister has schizophrenia, One night, when I was younger, we had to take her to a psychiatric hospital because she was having some kind of episode. It was very late, around 2 a.m., so most of the patients were asleep, and there were only a few nurses on duty. In the part of the building where we were, the hallway lights were off. We were in a small examination room with a table, chairs, and a couch. A hospital worker was talking to my sister. Up until a certain moment, she was sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth. But suddenly, she stopped, looked at the door leading to the dark hallway, and said, "Who's that?" We all turned around, but there was no one there. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Between my undergraduate and graduate studies, I worked in a psychiatric hospital for several months. It was a facility that primarily took in crisis patients for short-term stays. However, we also had people who stayed for months while waiting for a bed in a state hospital an hour away. We had a long-term patient diagnosed with severe treatment-resistant schizophrenia. He had been diagnosed in his teens, and by the time I met him, he was in his 60s. He had spent his entire life in psychiatric hospitals, occasionally being released. His thought disorder was so severe that his speech was nearly incomprehensible. He had a guardian who made decisions for him. When I started working there, he had already been there for about 2 months, and everyone knew him. He was a rather sweet old man, and all he really wanted in life was a cigarette, which he could never get. Sometimes he caused trouble, and I was asked to talk to him one-on-one. Over time, we got to know each other, and he seemed to like me. One day, he got very upset and hit me on the back of my head. The next day, he came up to me and said, "Sorry, Juba," that's what he called me, and gave me a hug. He was transferred to the state hospital the day before my last shift. People who have worked in psychiatric hospitals, tell us about your most difficult patient in the comments. And don't forget to check out our other videos. See you. Psychiatric hospital horror story: he gouged out his eye with a plastic spoon. One night at a psychiatric hospital, a woman with severe brain damage used a plastic spoon to gouge out her own eye, despite being physically restrained. Her eyeball was later found inside her stomach. Working in mental health isn't just challenging. It can be absolutely terrifying. This is one of the most shocking true stories from inside a psychiatric hospital. Mental illness can manifest in unimaginable ways. What are your thoughts? Share below.